up, everyone? Welcome to the Big Ten Football Talk Podcast. I'm your host, Zach Guggenheim. We're going to be talking about NFL Combine, which is going to lead us into the NFL Draft in a month or so. If you like the podcast, make sure to like, subscribe, share us on your favorite social media platform, whether that be Twitter or Instagram or Facebook. Let's get this podcast out there, especially with the NFL Draft fast approaching. We're going to have some news and updates throughout the draft process. Looking forward to the draft in a month or so. So we're going to be doing that, talking a lot about the NFL Combine. Again, you can like and subscribe at Apple, Spotify, Google, wherever you get your podcasts. We'll also have this up on YouTube as well. The NFL Combine was last week, and we're just going to be going straight through. We're going to be talking about the Combine. And we're going to talk about just overall impressions, some standouts, winners and losers. We're going to take a look at some mock drafts, some post mock drafts. And with that, we're going to talk about a couple of different topics. Whenever you get to the NFL draft, you start talking about quarterback play, and quarterback play is going to be something that we talk about. And we also talk about who are the elite players, who are the guys that you need to get. So we're going to dive into that a little bit. But first, let's talk about some of the standouts. Obviously, a lot of standouts just in the 40-yard dash. The 40-yard dash, I'm pretty sure it was just a very fast track in Indianapolis, because there were just a lot of fast times, a lot of times in the 4.3s, 4.4s. For those of you who are not familiar with the Combine, what they're doing is they're measuring kind of your top end speed in a 40-yard dash, hence why it's called the 40-yard dash. They're also doing things like vertical jumps, broad jumps, 3-cone drill. They're doing some on-field drills that are position specific, and anything that they can do to test your athleticism and strength. So they also do the bench press. I think it's a 225-pound rep that you have to do, and it says however many reps you can do at that weight. I think the record is like 45 reps at 225. Good night, Irene. That's a lot. Needless to say, I cannot do that. So anyway, we're going to talk about some of the winners and losers here. NFL.com released kind of their winners and losers, and I'm mostly going to focus on Big Ten prospects, because I think obviously this is a Big Ten dedicated podcast, but we are going to talk a little bit more about overall prospects down the road, but we're going to talk mostly about Big Ten prospects. The first night, it was quarterbacks, wide receivers, tight ends, and really the winners. I think two receivers in particular were winners: Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson. A lot of people thought they would be first-round picks if they did well at the Combine, and they both did really well at the Combine. Garrett Wilson ran a 4.38 when a lot of people expected him to run around a 4.5. A lot of people thought Chris Olave was going to run in the high 4.4s. And so because of that, they were like, okay, they played well, but they played in a wide open offense. You know, they had another guy on the field in Jackson Smith-Njigba who just, caught 350 yards worth of balls in one game. So how good are they really? And I think anyone who actually turns on the film would see they run excellent routes. Garrett Wilson has great athleticism and great athletic ability. But there was a question of their overall athleticism. And while Olave isn't maybe the most dynamic receiver, he wasn't going to impress anyone with his vertical, which he didn't really impress anyone with his vertical jump or his broad jump. But what he did do was he ran a 4.39 40-yard dash. The unofficial time was a 4.26, which is absurd, but for some reason they were way off on the time, which it was sad to me, because I really wanted him to have that 4.26. It would have been the fourth best time ever in the NFL Combine, but he ran a 4.39, and Garrett Wilson ran a 4.38, which a lot of people, including Matt Miller over at ESPN, said, hey, if he doesn't run well, he might be a second round pick. needless to say, that 40 time really bumps up his stock and really keeps him probably in that top 15 range. But Chris Olave really showed a lot of what he's about in the combine. His smoothness, he breaks in and out of routes. He can track the deep ball. He has great hands. So he did really well. Another guy who was not necessarily nearly as highlighted in the winners and losers on NFL.com, but Jahan Dotson was really good. I think he ran in the 4.4s. So really, really good speed. He's probably going to be in that second round conversation just because there's just a lot of receivers in that really good but not great range. Honestly, there's not a lot of elite receivers in this class. I love Olave and I love Wilson. They're not a Calvin Johnson or a Julio Jones or AJ Brown with his freakish athleticism. There's nobody like that in this draft. But you have a lot of really good receivers. And I think Jahan Dotson solidified himself as in that good group. And he'll be, I think, a high second round pick. Honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if he goes to the Bears to be a receiver that goes to pair with Justin Fields, who really needs weapons around him. So receivers did really well. A tight end that did really well, Chig Okonkwo from Maryland, tight end. He was impressive in the East West Shrine Bowl. He ran a 4.5240, which is really fast for a tight end. Now he's a little lighter. He's 238 pounds, but that was really, really good. He's probably going to be able to make it as an early day 3 selection. So that's pretty good for the former Terrapin. The losers, Treylon Burks from Arkansas. A lot of people thought he might be the number 1 wide receiver taken. I don't think that's going to be the case, just because his 40 time was pretty low. His vertical was not very good. He's a big guy. He's a big receiver, but he's probably going to slip a little bit, probably be a late first round selection. And then the guy that really got hurt, which I'm really sad about, is David Bell from Purdue. He is not a big receiver. And so Treylon Burks can get away with being to have a slower time because he's big. He's 225 pounds. I think he's 6'4", 6'3". David Bell is not that, and he ran worse than Treylon Burks. A 4.65 40-yard dash. Didn't even make 10 feet on the broad jump. He's going to fall in this draft, and he's probably going to be a 3rd, 4th round. He might even fall down to later in the day 3, where he's maybe 5th round or 6th round, which I don't want to see, because he's a really good receiver. You turn on the tape, you see his impact on the game against teams like Iowa earlier this year and Michigan State. He is a really good receiver, technically sound, but his athleticism was a question going into the draft, and honestly, really, really struggled in the combine. So that's too bad for him. Another guy that really didn't do well is Jake Ferguson. Thought he would do well, but really struggled to display athleticism with a 4.840. Was steady where he needed to be steady, but he's probably also going to be a day 3 pick, where I think earlier in the year, you could have made an argument that he might've been a day 2 pick. For those of you who are not aware of the NFL draft, day 1's first round only. Day 2 is rounds 2 and 3. And then day 3 is rounds 4 through 7. In day 2 of the combine, not to get confused with day 2 of the draft, some pretty strong performances out of Michigan State running back Kenneth Walker III out of Michigan State. Ran a 4.3840 at 211 pounds. That's a great speed for that size. Showed really good athleticism and agility, and really caught the ball well in the workout. So he is probably going to be an early day 2 pick. Really solidified himself as the number 1 running back. Depending on who wants a running back, he might sneak into the late first round. But he is definitely the number one running back on the board. He was competing with Breece Hall from Iowa State. I think Kenneth Walker easily is going to be the number one pick, number one running back taken off the board, and might even find a way to get into that round one consideration. Another guy who was solid and just really solidified was Tyler Linderbaum. He wasn't really going to do much to get himself out of that competition, but he is the number one center in this class. He is going to be a first round pick. He's probably going to be a 10-year starter in the NFL. And, Iowa just churns out interior linemen like nobody's business. He's a really good, solid player. On the defensive front, listen, I know I said Big Ten guys, but you have to look at how amazing the Georgia defensive players tested in this draft. Jordan Davis ran a 4.78 40. He's 340 pounds. Like, he's twice my size, and he ran a 40 probably 2 seconds faster than I could. It's insanity. That in my mind could really push him up the draft boards because he showed great athleticism and great agility in this thing. Trayvon Walker, honestly, depending on what teams do and how teams look at edge rushers in this draft, there's a real possibility that Trayvon Walker surpasses even Aiden Hutchinson just based off his athleticism. I doubt it because he doesn't have quite the film that Aiden Hutchinson and Kayvon Thibodeau has, but Trayvon Walker tested just off the charts. 451 in the 40. His jumps were great. His 3-cone drill was great. His flexibility was great. If he had the film for it, that's what you would expect a top 5, maybe number 1 overall pick to display. Devontae Wyatt out of Georgia, who is the second defensive tackle, was also excellent. And so I could see all 3 of those guys going in the first round. Another guy that unfortunately did not do well, not a Big Ten guy, but Devin Lloyd out of Utah did not test well. A lot of people thought he might be a top 10 pick, probably going to slide down draft boards because of his speed and his lack of athleticism in the draft or at the combine. And then last but not least, we'll talk a little bit about defensive backs and safeties. Sauce Gardner was a stud out of Cincinnati, probably going to be a top 5 overall pick. Showed off why he was one of the best corners in the country this year as a Bearcat. Nick Cross out of Maryland, another Terrapin, really tested well, was the number 1 safety in terms of speed, had just an absurd broad jump. Nick Cross really elevated his draft stock, has a chance to make it into day 2, I think. A day 2 pick. Ken Taylor Britt out of Nebraska did really well. I think has a chance to get into the top 100 picks. I thought was a really good corner at Nebraska. So good for him. That's kind of the top guys, the standouts of the draft from the Big Ten. Another guy that had some buzz after the combine was Dax Hill. A lot of people think he might be able to be not just a safety, but even a corner at the next level. So that flexibility, I think, is intriguing to some NFL GMs and execs. It's not to say that he was a standout necessarily, but Dax Hill showed enough versatility that I think is going to make him probably a mid to late first round pick because of that. Let's talk really briefly. I want to talk about some mock drafts. And as we do that, I want to address a couple things and then we'll wrap up here. But the combine or the post combine mock drafts are when you really start to see, like, people are starting to get tapped into how GMs are thinking, how coaches are thinking. And it's really helpful to know that because you just get a sense, okay, what's going to happen on draft night? And there's sometimes some surprises, but you really get a sense of what's going to happen. And couple of takeaways that I would say. One is that this is going to be a a draft that is very heavy on offensive and defensive linemen. So if you look at a number of these drafts, these mock drafts, a lot of them, the top 3 picks are all either edge rushers or offensive linemen. And in fact, out of the 5 on CBS Sports, the only non-lineman that cracks the top 5 at all is Kyle Hamilton at safety from Notre Dame. If you look at the others, it's Akeem Ekwonu, Ekwonu, I think is how you say it, from NC State, Aiden Hutchinson from Michigan, Evan Neal out of Alabama, Kayvon Thibodeau out of Oregon, Charles Cross out of Mississippi State. Those are your kind of consensus top 5, top 6, along with Kyle Hamilton. So that's, that's a real trend. You have a lot of other edge rushers too. Jermaine Johnson out of Florida State. Jordan Davis, who's a defensive tackle, obviously he's up there. Trayvon Walker. And then you get some other guys. You get some linebackers like Devin Lloyd, Nakobe Dean, and then you also get some wide receivers. So a lot of people have Garrett Wilson as the number 1 receiver. Some people have Chris Olave out there. The highest I see Garrett Wilson out there is number 8. But overall, if you look at the NFL, the mock drafts, and you look at the Big Ten, I think it's going to be a pretty good showing for the Big Ten. I've seen at least one mock draft where I think there were up to 8 players, maybe even 9, where you 9 players in the first round. So, for instance, if you go and look at, I think it's Chris Trapasso's mock draft, he has Aiden Hutchinson at 2 to the Detroit Lions. He then has Chris Olave going to the Washington Commanders. I can't get used to that, but he has him as the number 1 receiver. That's number 2. That's the number 2 Big Ten guy. At 13, Garrett Wilson. That's the number 3. He has Boy Mafe from Minnesota at 15. So that's 4. Tyler Linderbaum, that's 5. He has him going to the Eagles. Daxton Hill, 6 for the Patriots at 21. Number 23, he has David Ajabo, which that's the 7th. Let's see here. George Karlaftis going to the Packers at 28. And then Daniel Falele, an offensive lineman for Minnesota, at 31 of the Bengals, which they need help. That's 9 guys in the first round. And if you think about it, it's not just that there's 9 players in that top 32, but they're all from a lot of different schools. So you've got 2 from Ohio State, you've got 3 from Michigan, you got 1 from Iowa, you have 2 from Minnesota. That's a lot of guys, and then 1 from Purdue and George Karlaftis. That's a great showing for the Big Ten. So I think the NFL draft is going to be a good marketing tool for a lot of schools in the Big Ten, which I think is really needed, because right now it's, it's a lot of publicity for the SEC. So it's good for the Big Ten. It's a good look for the league. There's also a question though of why is there so many Big Ten players? Why is that? And I think one is there's a lot of talent in the Big Ten. But I also think there is a lack of elite players in the country. So I think a lot of the Georgia players are going to rise up the draft boards, because Trayvon Walker and Jordan Davis and all those guys, they tested out of their minds. And if you look at the top candidates going into the combine, a lot of what how they were talked about was they were safe players. Like Aiden Hutchinson is a safe player. And look, I love Aiden Hutchinson. I think he's a really good player. He's not Nick Bosa or Joey Bosa or Chase Young or Myles Garrett or any of the top elite edge rushers of the past 5 years. He's just not. And I'm not saying that to say that he's not going to be a good player. I think he's going to be a really good player, but there's a difference between getting AJ Hawk at 15 years ago and having a solid player who never makes a Pro Bowl and getting a linebacker like Clay Matthews, who is a perennial All-Pro and is a difference maker on your roster. They're both good players, but one is a game wrecker and the other is really solid and is a stabilizer in your defense. And typically, I would have rather gotten AJ Hawk in the middle of the first round or maybe even the second round versus, wasting a top 5 pick on him. Aiden Hutchinson is kind of feels that way to me, where Aiden Hutchinson, I think, is going to be a really good player. I think he might be a Pro Bowler at some point, but he's not going to wow you. He doesn't wow you all that much with his athleticism and his traits. He's a really good player, has a great work ethic, and I think, might have a couple seasons where he has double-digit sacks, which is great. That's great. If I were a GM, I would take Trayvon Walker over him at this point because just the way he tested, and he's more of a splash. I would take Kayvon Thibodeau over him, even though Kayvon Thibodeau is a little undersized, and that there's some concerns about him. But that's one of the reasons why this is an offensive line, defensive line driven draft. The receivers are great. They're not elite. There is no Calvin Johnson in this draft. I love Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave. I love Jahan Dotson. I think Treylon Burks is a good player. There's a lot of receivers who are going to go first round that honestly, people are going to have to wait for a while for them to really show up to be productive players. Not because they're bad, but they're not. There's no elite playmakers at wide receiver in this draft. There's no Jamar Chase. Okay. And while we're at it, I think there's only one or two elite corners. I think Sauce Gardner is an elite corner. I think Derek Stingley could be an elite corner if he can stay healthy. I think there's a little bit of character concern with him, but I think there's not a lot of elite cornerback play beyond those two guys. Kyle Hamilton is a really, really good safety. I thought he was going to test really well at the combine. He didn't. He tested fine. But I think he's a really good safety. I don't know if he's an elite safety. I think he might be able to become that, but I have concerns about his athleticism now. And so that's part of the reason why you're seeing a lot of offensive linemen, a lot of wide receivers. And here's my last point. I really hope that because of the lack of eliteness, my hope is that GMs don't make the mistake that teams always make the mistake of, and that's starting to take quarterbacks too quickly. I've looked at multiple mock drafts where some of them have like 5 quarterbacks being taken in the first round. 5. And if I can just take a look, I think there's a couple, let's see, I think it's Stackpole who has Kenny Pickett going 6 to the Panthers out of Pitt. He has Malik Willis going to Denver. I don't know why he'd have him going to Denver after the Russell Wilson trade, but he does. He has Desmond Ridder going to the Commanders. So that's 3 in the top 11 picks. And then he has Matt Corral going to the Steelers at 20. And he has Sam Howell going to the Lions at 32. Listen, I like a lot of the traits of these quarterbacks. I really do. None of these guys, for one, none of these quarterbacks should sniff the top 10 in terms of talent. None of them should sniff the top 10 in terms of talent. Compare this quarterback group to last year's quarterback group. You had Trevor Lawrence, who is maybe one of the best quarterback prospects ever. Zach Wilson, who really shot up draft boards. Trey Lance, who has, as much as we want to talk about Malik Willis and his traits, Trey Lance's traits are far better. Justin Fields, who arguably was a top 2 quarterback all year, and then for some reason just slid at the end of the draft process. He was 11th, and then Mac Jones was 15th. I would take all 5 of those quarterbacks over any of the quarterbacks in this draft. So why on earth would you spend the number 6 pick on a guy you're not even sure about? Like Kenny Pickett had a couple of good years at Pitt. Great. He plays in the ACC. The traits are good. They're not great. Malik Willis, yeah, he's got traits for days. Awesome. Please don't draft a quarterback based on traits. That doesn't always work out. I mean, and I'm not saying don't draft him. I'm saying, listen, there are more sure things in this draft. And unless if you think that this guy could be your starter for the next 15 years, why are you drafting him 9? Why are you drafting, Desmond Ridder? I like Desmond Ridder. If he goes anywhere near the first round, like that franchise deserves to tank for the next 3 years. Because Desmond Ridder, as good as I think he can be, he's not a guy you should waste a top 11 pick on. I'm sorry, he's just not good enough. And you can bolster your roster with better talent and then take a quarterback in the second round, or you could take better talent and stink this year and then wait till next year and get either CJ Stroud or Bryce Young. By the way, both are far better. Both quarterbacks are far superior to the quarterbacks in this draft. Like, don't make this mistake, GMs. Be smart. Shore up your line play because there's some really good offensive linemen. Shore up your defensive line. Get a good number 2 receiver, or maybe a number 1 receiver. Get a solid to good corner or linebacker to shore up the middle of your defense, or the back 7. But don't settle for a quarterback just because I need a quarterback to replace such and such in 3 years. Like, I mean, think about it. The Packers wasted a first-round pick on Jordan Love, and they clearly are not ready to move on from Aaron Rodgers because they just extended him for 4 years. Like, why on earth would you do that? So teams are going to do it because quarterbacks are valuable. But listen, if you're a fan of an NFL team and you're like, we need a quarterback, this is not the year. Like, I don't think any of these quarterbacks are going to be all-time greats. I don't think any of these guys are going to be anything more than maybe a 1 or 2-time Pro Bowler, if that. Listen, I like Matt Corral. I like Sam Howell. I think if of all the guys, I think those would be the 2. Kenny Pickett a little bit as well. But listen, this is not the draft for quarterbacks. It's just not, but they always get elevated because of their status and their position. But I'd love to hear your thoughts. What do you guys think about quarterbacks? What do you think about the NFL draft coming up? Would love to hear your thoughts. Leave a review. This has been the Big Ten Football Talk podcast. We will not be back next week. I'm going to be on a service trip, so I'm going to be all focused on that. But we'll be back in 2 weeks, probably with more stuff on the NFL draft. I'll also do a little bit. This came out recently today on social media, but an Ohio State player, Harry Miller, came out and said he was medically retiring from football. And I want to take some time to talk about that because he talked a lot about mental health. And I want to talk about that because I think it's important for us to talk about as a society. And so make sure to stay tuned on that. Again, this has been the Big Ten Football Talk podcast. Signing off. Take care. God bless.